The cold, black water of the Volturno River in Italy in the autumn of 1943 seemed a more formidable adversary than the artillery batteries hidden in the fog on the opposite bank. In the night silence, broken only by distant rumbling thunder, which was in fact the sound of heavy guns, a group of men in soaking wet uniforms were accomplishing what seemed impossible. They held no rifles. Their main weapons at that moment were heavy wrenches, rubber pontoons, and steel panels. These were engineers, men whose personal war was not about seizing territory, but about creating the very possibility for that forward movement. Without them, without these builders of crossings, the most powerful mechanized army in history would have simply turned into a heap of useless iron stuck in the mud in front of water obstacles. That night, standing waist-deep in the icy, bone-chilling current, they understood one simple and brutal truth. Tanks cannot swim, and infantry cannot walk on water. The path to the enemy's heart, to distant Berlin, lay not across battlefields, but across rivers, ravines, and minefields that had to be overcome at any cost. Every hammer blow on the steel pin connecting bridge sections rang out with a clang that seemed audible for miles around. This sound could attract the attention of observers on the other bank, provoke a hail of fire, but stopping was not an option. War is primarily logistics, and logistics is movement. If movement ceases, the army begins to suffocate. The engineers were the pacemaker of this gigantic, multi-million-strong organism. Their task was simple in formulation and incredibly complex in execution. To ensure the continuous flow of millions of people and hundreds of thousands of vehicles across a continent where every bridge was blown, every road destroyed, and every tunnel blocked. This was the beginning of a great engineering campaign that stretched from the mountain ranges of the Balkans and southern Europe to the wide plains of Germany. History often remembers the names of generals and the titles of strategies, but the reality of success was forged in icy water, in impassable mud, under crossfire, by the rough hands of those who built crossings where nature and the enemy erected insurmountable barriers. To fully grasp the scale of what was happening, one must imagine Europe of that time not as a political map with state borders, but as an incredibly complex obstacle course. The Old World was crisscrossed by veins of rivers, arteries of roads, and a skeleton of mountain ranges. By the mid-20th century, this centuries-old infrastructure had been systematically and ruthlessly destroyed. Retreating armies left behind only ruins, guided by a scorched earth tactic. Every picturesque viaduct, every stone bridge that had stood for centuries and remembered even Roman legions, was turned into a pile of rubble in a matter of seconds. The enemy understood perfectly. Time worked for the defender. A blown-up bridge meant days, and sometimes weeks, gained for regrouping. For advancing forces, it meant a halt, equipment accumulating in one place, vulnerability to airstrikes. And it was at this critical moment, when the offensive faltered before another obstacle, that they emerged, sappers and engineers. This was a war of speeds. Not the speed of a projectile's flight, but the speed of construction. History textbooks often write about swift tank wedges cutting through defenses, but rarely mention that the spearhead of this wedge always rested on the back of a bulldozer or an engineering breaching vehicle. Engineer troops were the true vanguard, though often they remained in the shadow of the glory of assault units. Their work began long before the first tank tracks touched enemy soil. Reconnaissance of the bank, analysis of soil density, calculation of load capacity of supports. This was higher mathematics under fire. A miscalculation here did not cost a bad grade, but the loss of an entire battalion whose equipment could plunge into an abyss along with an unreliable crossing. The responsibility resting on the shoulders of these people was colossal. The complexity of the task increased as they advanced deeper into the continent. The first serious test was Italy. If hell exists on Earth, then for engineers in 43, it looked like the Italian mountains under pouring rain. Here, the main enemy was the terrain, narrow serpentines hanging over abysses, mountain rivers with raging currents, constant landslides. Equipment often proved powerless in these conditions. Mighty tractors bogged down in mud that resembled glue in consistency. Engineers had to resort to methods of past centuries, using mules to deliver materials to heights where roads needed to be reinforced or crossings built. People worked knee-deep in liquid slush, literally carving a path through the rocks. Every mile of advance north of the Apennine Peninsula was paid for with thousands of tons of moved earth and stone. It was in Italy that engineer troops honed their skill in rapidly constructing Bailey bridges, an ingenious invention resembling a giant children's construction set that could be assembled manually without the use of cranes. But the real test of endurance awaited them ahead, on the coast of Normandy. Preparation for the landing became the most grandiose engineering operation in human history. Even before the first landing craft touched the sand, engineers were already waging their invisible war. Under the cover of night, combat swimmers, sappers, explored the coastal zone, mapping underwater obstacles, mines, and hedgehogs. When D-Day arrived, it was the engineers who went in the first ranks of the assault waves. Their task was not to shoot, but to blow up steel and concrete obstacles, clearing corridors for tanks and infantry. They worked on the open beach, under dagger-like machine gun fire, with explosive charges in their hands. Many of them remained there forever, but the passages were made. However, the landing was just the beginning. To supply a huge army, ports were needed, but all ports on the coast were either captured by the enemy or destroyed. The solution proposed by the engineers bordered on science fiction. If there are no ports, we will bring them with us. The artificial mulberry harbors, giant concrete caissons as tall as a 5-story building, were built in England, towed across the strait and sunk off the coast of France, forming protected breakwaters and piers. It was a triumph of engineering thought over the forces of nature. Thanks to these artificial harbors, thousands of vehicles came ashore daily, and tons of supplies were unloaded. Advancing deeper into France brought a new, unexpected problem. The terrain of Normandy, known as bocage, was a labyrinth of fields separated by high earthen embankments, thickly overgrown with bushes and trees. Over centuries, the roots of plants intertwined with stones, turning these embankments into impregnable natural fortresses. A tank trying to overcome such an embankment would raise its nose, exposing its thin underside to attack and get stuck, becoming an easy target. The offensive threatened to halt. The solution came not from high offices, but, as is often the case, from a simple engineering sergeant. The idea was simple and brilliant. Weld steel teeth, made from fragments of German coastal defenses, to the front of the tank. These devices, nicknamed rhinos, allowed the tank to crash into the hedgerow, cutting it down at the root and breaking through in a matter of seconds. Engineering ingenuity once again saved the situation, turning the enemy's defensive advantage into nothing. As the front receded eastward, the logistical services faced a task of colossal difficulty: supply. General Patton's tanks surged forward with such speed that the rear services couldn't keep up with fuel and ammunition deliveries. Railways had been destroyed by Allied aircraft even before the landing, and bridges blown up by the retreating Germans. The hour of glory for road builders and drivers had arrived. The famous Red Ball Express system was organized, an endless convoy of trucks commuting between the coast and the front line. But trucks need roads, and roads, under the weight of thousands of heavy vehicles, crumbled to dust. Engineer battalions worked around the clock, patching pavement, widening roadways, building detours. They lived in dust, ate dust, and breathed dust. Simultaneously, another fantastic project was being implemented, laying a fuel pipeline across the bottom of the English Channel. The pipeline, named Pluto, allowed gasoline to be pumped directly from England to France, quenching the insatiable thirst of tank engines. The external conflict of this great construction was obvious: man against shattered matter. Thousands of tons of steel, concrete, and wood had to be moved, assembled, and secured in conditions where everything around was trying to destroy you. Enemy artillery pre-sighted crossings, knowing the coordinates of every bottleneck. Snipers purposefully hunted engineering officers, understanding their value. Aircraft bombed newly constructed pontoon bridges. It was an endless race: build faster than they can destroy. Road repair under mortar fire became routine. An engineer operating a grader sat in an open spot, towering over the battlefield like a target at a shooting range. He had no armor, only the thin steel sheet of the cabin and an unwavering belief that his work was more important than his personal safety. But there was another layer of conflict, hidden from view but no less dramatic: the internal one. The psychology of an engineer at war differs radically from that of an assault soldier. A soldier with a rifle sees the enemy and can return fire. His action is an active counter-threat. An engineer, however, often works with his back to danger. He must fully concentrate on the blueprint, on the fastening node, on the winch mechanism, ignoring the whistle of shrapnel around him. This requires a special kind of courage, a cold, calculating calm at the epicenter of chaos. What is it like to tighten a nut, knowing that in a second everything could disappear in a flash of an explosion? What is it like to build a bridge, realizing that the first tanks to cross it might be destroyed on the other bank, and your work will become a one-way road for your comrades? These people lived with a constant sense of responsibility for the fates of others. The winter of '44 brought new trials. In the Ardennes, when the German army launched its last desperate counter-offensive, the role of engineers suddenly changed. From builders, they turned into destroyers. To stop the advance of enemy tanks, they had to blow up the very bridges they might have planned to restore later. This was a severe psychological breaking point, destroying infrastructure to save the army. In bitter frosts, when the ground was frozen so hard that it resisted a shovel, sappers mined approaches, created forest blockades, turning every kilometer of the path into a trap for the advancing enemy. General Frost was cruel to everyone, but working with cold metal and explosives with bare hands in the wind required superhuman endurance. When the counteroffensive was repelled and the Allied armies once again moved eastward, they faced the last and most formidable obstacle: the Rhine. This was not just a wide river, it was a mythological barrier, Germany's sacred border, which no army had crossed in battle since Napoleon's time. The Rhine was swift, deep, and treacherous. The Wehrmacht command placed their last hopes on it, turning every bridge into a trap ready to snap shut. It seemed that here engineering thought would encounter an insurmountable obstacle. Preparation for crossing the Rhine, codenamed Operation Plunder, became the largest logistical and engineering operation of all time. Thousands of tons of pontoon parks, landing craft, and amphibious vehicles were secretly brought to the bank. The forests around the crossing points were packed with equipment. It was a triumph of industrial power. But history loves paradoxes. Before the start of the large-scale operation, a miracle occurred near the small town of Remagen. The advanced detachment of an American division reached the Ludendorff railway bridge and was surprised to find it still standing. The Germans were preparing to blow it up. Charges had been laid. The moment the Americans approached the bridge entrance, an explosion rang out. The structure leaped, enveloped in smoke. But when the dust settled, the bridge was still in place. The charge had not fully detonated. One of the main trusses was damaged but held. This was a moment of truth, the decisive second of the entire campaign. Engineers rushed onto the bridge under a hail of machine gun and artillery fire from the eastern bank. They didn't know if it was remined, if the redundant detonators would work, or if the damaged supports would withstand the weight of tanks. It was an act of pure professional heroism. While assault groups seized the bridgehead, engineers crawled along the steel trusses, cutting wires leading to remaining charges, welding up holes, laying a wooden deck over the railway tracks so tanks could pass. 24 hours a day, non-stop, under incessant bombardments. The enemy even tried to use jet aircraft to destroy the bridge. People held this crossing with their efforts and prayers. The bridge groaned, creaked, and vibrated, but it stood. The capture of the Remagen Bridge broke the psychological backbone of the Rhine defense. The river, which had seemed an impregnable wall, became an open gate. However, Remagen was just a lucky accident, a gift of fate. The main work unfolded further north, where a planned crossing operation began. In one night, the wide Rhine was covered with dozens of bridges. It was a magnificent sight. Heavy pontoon bridges, floating bridges on boats, light assault crossings. Everything came into motion simultaneously. Engineers worked in a thick artificial fog created by chemical units to conceal the crossings from aimed fire. In this surreal white haze, where orientation was lost and sounds were muffled, people moved like ghosts. Piles were driven, decks were laid, sections were joined. The speed of bridge assembly reached fantastic figures. A Bailey bridge panel weighed almost 300 kilograms, carried by 6 men. In cold water, in mud, on slippery banks, people lifted thousands of such panels, assembling them into a single, rigid structure. It was a triumph of standardization and collective labor. When the wind dispersed the smokescreen, the enemy saw with horror a finished bridge where only black water had been hours before. This demoralized the enemy more than carpet bombings. The sight of the inexorably advancing engineering machine, impossible to stop, instilled a feeling of complete hopelessness. The culmination came in the spring of 1945. The road into Germany was open. Now it was a race. Soviet troops from the east and allies from the west tightened the ring. The nature of the engineers' work changed again. Now they were not so much building as clearing. German cities lay in ruins. Streets were littered with mountains of bricks, concrete, and twisted metal several stories high. It was impossible to drive through them. Bulldozers, these armored plows of war, came to the forefront. They cut swaths through this chaos, moving tons of debris, creating corridors for tanks and ambulances. The dust was so thick that the sun was not visible. People worked in respirators and masks, choking on fumes and stench. Mines and booby traps posed a particular danger. Retreating, the enemy mined everything: abandoned equipment, buildings, roads, and even household items. This was the quietest and most nerve-wracking work of the war. Sappers went first, probing every inch of ground with long feelers. One wrong move, one missed weak signal from a metal detector, and the engineer's path ended in tragedy. The Germans were masters of their craft. They used mines in wooden, glass, and plastic casings that magnetic devices could not detect. They set mines for non-recovery, creating complex cascades of explosive devices. It was an intellectual duel between the designer of the infernal machine and the one who tried to defuse it. Engineers learned to, quote, zero the ground, to notice the slightest changes in the color of the grass, sunken soil, unnaturally lying objects. This developed an almost supernatural intuition. And when a column passed along a cleared road without a single explosion, it was the sappers' quiet, imperceptible victory, which was not written about in newspapers, but which saved hundreds of lives. In these spring days, an event occurred that became a symbol of the end of the engineering war and the division of Europe: the meeting on the Elbe. The destroyed bridge in the city of Torgau became the site of a historic contact. But for the famous handshake to take place, the crossing had to be restored. Sappers of the two great armies, advancing from the west and from the east, met on the banks of the river. They spoke different languages, used different systems of weights and measures. Their equipment was fundamentally different. Soviet engineers masterfully worked with wood, erecting reliable pile structures from improvised materials with incredible speed. Americans relied on steel, pontoons, and factory modular designs. But, looking at each other, they saw not ideological rivals, but professional colleagues. They understood the value of each other's labor. A glance at calloused hands, at oil-stained uniforms, at tools in their belts, said more than any words. They connected not just two banks of the river, they connected two worlds, completing a gigantic encirclement. The movement stopped. The engines died. Silence fell, unaccustomed and ringing after so many years of continuous roar. For an engineer, this is the strangest, most paradoxical moment. His work is, in essence, finished when the army's movement ceases. But it is at this moment that the true, profound meaning of what they have done begins to manifest itself. The lessons of this grand construction go far beyond military history and tactics. We are accustomed to perceiving war exclusively as a history of destruction, as a process of annihilation. But the history of the road to Berlin teaches us that even in the most monstrous circumstances, amidst total chaos, man is capable of creation. The ability to build bridges, in a direct and philosophical sense, proved stronger than the ability to blow them up. Here lies the ideological, philosophical layer of the conflict. War is entropy, decay, the transformation of ordered structures into dust. The engineer, by nature, is the antithesis of war. He is a creator of order. Building a bridge is an act of connection, an act of overcoming a gap. In the midst of the greatest conflict, when nations were divided by front lines and hatred, engineers were busy connecting. Yes, they built roads so that tanks carrying death to the enemy could pass. But these same roads, the next day, became arteries for delivering food to starving cities, for refugees to return home. Every action they took carried the seed of a future peace. A restored water pipeline nourished both soldiers and civilians. A street cleared of rubble allowed both an armored car and a woman with a baby carriage to pass. Infrastructure is the skeleton of civilization. War breaks the bones of society, tearing apart connections between people and cities. Engineers were surgeons who stitched these tears directly onto the living, bleeding body of Europe. Their work showed that the world is unified and interconnected. A road, begun on the beaches of Normandy, through the swamps of Belgium and the mountains of Germany, inevitably led to a meeting. Technologies developed for war, rapidly deployable structures, powerful earth-moving equipment, methods of network planning, became a solid foundation for post-war reconstruction. Europe rose from the ashes largely thanks to the same skills and the same techniques that were used for military breakthroughs. Bailey bridges served civilians in remote corners of the continent for many years, sometimes decades, connecting villages and cities until they were replaced by permanent capital structures. Many of the temporary pipelines and airfields formed the basis of modern civil infrastructure. Today, driving along the smooth, modern autobahns of Europe or crossing majestic bridges over the Rhine, we rarely reflect on what lies at their deep foundation. And at their foundation, metaphorically, lies the sweat, blood, and incredible exertion of those guys with wrenches and shovels. We perceive free movement as a given, as a natural right. But every kilometer of this path was once a battlefield, every bridge a point of overcoming the impossible, every pass a test of will. The history of military engineers reminds us of an important truth. Any barriers, be they rivers, mountains, or ruins, are surmountable if there is the will, knowledge, and courage to take the first step into the cold water. Ultimately, everything boils down to a simple and timeless image. A man stands on the bank of a wide river. Before him is an obstacle, dark water, the unknown. Behind him is the necessity to move forward, duty, comrades. This image is universal for any era. In 1945, this obstacle was the Elbe, the Rhine, or the Volturno. Today, these could be other challenges, other barriers separating people and countries. But the principle remains unchanged. Someone must take the courage and responsibility to start building a crossing. Someone must enter the water first, risking being swept away by the current. Someone must drive the first pile into the shifting bottom. Our narrative cycle closes. We began with the cold, black waters of the Volturno, where a handful of people fought against the current and darkness, and arrived at the quiet waters of the Elbe, where the bridge became a symbol of the end of the greatest tragedy of the 20th century. The path between these two rivers was paved not only with steel, concrete, and rubble, but also with incredible human resilience. Engineers did not simply lay a physical road to the center of Europe. They laid a road to the future, proving that even when the world crumbles, man remains a builder with a capital B. And as long as there are those willing to connect shores, humanity has a chance for recovery. The roar of cannons has long died down. Tanks have gone to museums or to be melted down. Old scars on the earth have overgrown with grass. But the bridges remain. And even if the military structures themselves have long been replaced by new ones, the memory that any stream can be crossed lives on in every new span thrown across a river. This is the main, indestructible legacy of the engineers of that war. The belief that there is no shore that cannot be reached, and no abyss that cannot be bridged.